Okay, so the basic message of this passage is that Jesus transformed lives. And it's pretty easy to see that that's the basic message. But we're going to look deeper at deeper messages than this. You can read the passage in a couple of different ways. One is you can look at the broader literary context, like what comes before and what comes after. And that's what we kind of did in the first part of the emails. We looked at what are the stories before and why are they significant? And we're going to keep looking at that in this video. The second way is to think about the practice of hospitality in the Near East in Jesus's time. We're going to talk about the spiritual practice of hospitality, but the concept of hospitality back then was a little different. It was reciprocal, which means it was quid pro quo. It was, if you did something for me, I would be expected to do something back for you. And that was a big part of hospitality back then. So if somebody came to stay with you, you would expect them to invite you to stay with them. And if you had someone over for dinner, you'd expect them to bring a gift or invite you over for dinner. There was always you had to pay it back. So the story of Zacchaeus kind of upset some of those expectations. So Luke 19:1, we're in Jericho, and in your email you'll see pictures that we took when we were in Jericho when we went to the Holy Land a couple years ago. And you'll see what's left after 2,000 years, and there's not much, but it's very interesting. There's actually quite a bit, but it doesn't look like much in the pictures. Jericho fits into a lot of the stories of the Bible and a lot of the stories of Jesus. That's where the walls came tumbling down, and Rahab, the prostitute, and all that stuff. So an important city. It was important in Jesus's time because it was the center of trade and commerce. It was a good place for a tax collector to live. Could make a good living. In verse 2, we meet Zacchaeus and we learn his name, his title, and his status. He's a chief tax collector and he is rich. In verse 3, we're reminded of the story that came before in Luke 18 about the blind man asking Jesus to restore his sight. Even though the blind man couldn't see, he could see what it meant that Jesus was near. And he knew to cry out for mercy, whereas Zacchaeus was not able to see, and he really didn't necessarily know what it meant for Jesus to be passing by. Maybe he was just curious. But he was not a well-liked man, so as he's pushing through this crowd, you can imagine that nobody was helping him. His status was low. So, and many of the words in this, as this happens a lot in the Bible, many of the words have a double meaning. So when we talk about the rich, that Zacchaeus was rich, he was rich in money and goods, but it also can be used metaphorically, which means kind of like as an example, he was rich at the beginning of the story in goods and money, but at the end of the story, he was rich in the kingdom of heaven. Again, Zacchaeus was called short. Well, he was physically short, so that's literal. He was literally short, but it also refers to the smallness of his spirit, the insignificance of his life. He had done nothing to further the kingdom of God, nothing. So look for those double meanings. Verse 4, Zacchaeus he's dying to see Jesus. And this is similar, again, Luke does this on purpose. We can be pretty sure that it's similar to the blind man's dying to see Jesus and have Jesus notice him. And you'd expect a man of Zacchaeus' status in society to show some dignity, but he doesn't. He jumps up into a tree as quick as he can so that he can see Jesus. In verse 5, Jesus sees Zacchaeus. And just like the tax collector in Luke 18, who went back to his house justified because he had asked for mercy, this tax collector would have the opportunity to be justified by welcoming Jesus. So, and it's interesting to think about the hospitality conventions here. We would have expected Zacchaeus to offer hospitality to Jesus, to invite him to his home, but he was probably afraid to do that because he was afraid that Jesus was going to reject him because, he's a tax collector. Sorry, there's a bug. There is the people of that time. Instead, Jesus invited himself to come to Zacchaeus' house. And actually at that time, that really would not have been seen as a weird thing, because if a rabbi was to invite himself over to your house, that was considered quite an honor. So, but it would have seemed weird to them that he wanted to stay at a tax collector's house, but it wasn't weird that he invited himself. Here's another word. The Greek word stay doesn't just mean come and visit or spend the night or have dinner. Stay in this Greek word meant abide. So you remember, like Jesus says, abide with me. It has a sense of a deeper relationship, of really be part of my life. It's kind of about the presence of God enduring. Jesus was promising to abide with Zacchaeus in his home. He's offering God's hospitality to this man who's considered an outcast and a sinner by the other Jews. Verse 6, Zacchaeus comes down quickly. And here's another one of those words that can have a literal and metaphorical meaning, because literally, he jumped out of the tree. He didn't take much time to get out of the tree, but metaphorically, he came down in eagerness and anticipation. He was excited that Jesus wanted to talk to him. And compare that to the rich young ruler, when Jesus told the rich young ruler what to do, and he did not obey Jesus. Whereas when Jesus tells Zacchaeus to come down, Jesus comes down. Jesus obeys Jesus. He's eager to obey. Verse 7, we see that a lot of people in the crowd are not too happy about this. The people that have witnessed Jesus' graciousness are grumbling. The rabbi is going to be a guest of the tax collector. But you know what? The Pharisees grumble a whole lot about Jesus' actions. Complaining about the graciousness of God expressed through Jesus was a common theme throughout the Gospels. Verse 8, Jesus is going to Zacchaeus' house. He says, and it had a big impact on Zacchaeus. He immediately says he's going to give half his wealth to the poor and repay 4 times what he has cheated from people. Again, look back at that rich young ruler. He could say what the law said. He knew the law. It's like I'm sure that there are Christians out there that know the Bible back and forth. But when Jesus told him what he wanted him to do, he wasn't willing to give up his wealth. Whereas Zacchaeus, Jesus never even told Zacchaeus to do anything. His giving up his wealth was in response to Jesus's offering, just his presence, just him being there. Verse 9, after hearing what Zacchaeus was going to do, Jesus proclaims that salvation had come to this house. Now, salvation here has a lot of different meanings. Salvation had come to Zacchaeus in the form of Jesus, who had come to his house and had come to save the lost. But evidence of salvation is also seen in Zacchaeus' response to Jesus. Like Zacchaeus is being saved by how he responds to Jesus. And actually, salvation or healing would come as a result of Zacchaeus' giving the money back, because that was going to help a lot of people. So lots of different ways that salvation came to this house. Verse 10, the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost, really seems to be directed at the people who had been grumbling, to remind them that he came to save the lost, not the ones who believed they were already found.